Right, well, welcome to this week's drop-in session. The topic we're looking at today is how to get the most out of process workshops using Skore. And in true Skore style, I have created a process to walk through really just some of our experience and some tips and tricks. Even included a little photo there of somebody using Skore in a live workshop, which I noticed when I put the photograph up that actually the version of Skore in there must be version 1, because it was the really old grey interface that we used to use a few years ago. But really, so the thing to start with is, I guess, why use a workshop? Why not just sit in a room and map a process from your mind, or in an interview? And the benefits of running a workshop are really about getting people together. It's a number of things, but it's about alignment. So if you can get a group of people together to talk about the process at the same time, you're much more likely to get a better alignment between those people, because everybody involved in a process is going to kind of get used to doing things in their way, finding little workarounds to do things. And so over time, what happens is the way processes happen will often diverge from person to person. So it's a really good opportunity for everybody to talk about how they follow or do the process. What are the things that they've learned? Because often there's some useful sharing about, hey, this thing works really well. Maybe someone else wants to try it. But also, it's about alignment of the challenges that people experience in the process as well. So a good opportunity for people to talk through how they experience issues or challenges within a process, because often people will describe the same problem but in different ways, and so they can seem like different problems. And so going through this exercise can really help align on that sort of thing. And it's brilliant as well, because sometimes people just don't talk about these things as often as they perhaps should. And so the amount of times I've been in a session where people have they sit next to each other on the desk, and then in the workshop they go, oh, that's what you do, I didn't realize. And so you sort of get these really kind of nice moments where people sort of just suddenly kind of have this kind of meeting of minds. And you could argue to some extent as well that it can save time, because if you've got to go around and interview a lot of people about a process, you're going to spend a lot of time spending an hour or two with each person, whereas if you can get them in the room together, you can sort of get it all done together. Conversations generally take a little bit longer, so you need a bit more time to run a workshop, but again, you can sort of get everybody on the same page. Some of the challenges that we face in terms of running a workshop with Skore specifically is that people will often be more familiar with, or perhaps more comfortable using a whiteboard, brown paper and sticky notes to do it. And it is a bit of a mind shift in terms of doing it. But actually, one of the things that Skore provides is through its simple notation and approach, it provides a framework which essentially helps with the facilitation. So it really helps guiding the conversation, the questions, and so on, which is something that you don't necessarily have within when you're just using a whiteboard, which is much more free form. Sometimes you have situations where you are in a bit more of a kind of brainstorm type environment, and the whiteboard might be a better medium to do that sort of exercise on. But again, one of the challenges we've often had in the past is about the sort of interactive nature of a workshop. So there's something very nice with the sort of tactile piece of moving post-it notes around on the board, or getting people to write their own post-it notes. And there's a danger you lose a bit of that with using Skore. But just as this image shows here, actually what happens is you're really focusing more on just talking about the actual process, and people do become quite animated, and they'll jump out of their chairs and stand by the screen and point and all the rest of it. So it can still be quite very engaging and interactive as well, but just in a different way. And what you're doing is you're taking away some of the hurdles that you might have just around things like handwriting, for example, where somebody's written a post-it note, you stick it on the board, and then half an hour later you come back and you can't remember what it actually says because nobody could read it, and things like that. Okay, so in terms of running workshops, we tend to break this, or I think of it in these 3 steps. There's the things you do before the workshop, there's actually running the workshop, and then there's following up afterwards, making sure that you've any actions and things you've agreed have been actioned and processed accordingly. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to dive into, and I'm going to try and go through this as quickly as I can. Going to dive into the prepare workshop piece, and again, I've just prepared a simple process and actually talking this through with Chris a couple of days ago. I think what we might do with this is actually share it on the template library afterwards. So if you want to get a copy of this and access any of the information, then it will be available to everybody. But essentially just some high level stuff. So I talk about completing the process template here. And a couple of weeks ago in the drop-in session, I shared what I mean by the process template, but in the attachment, I've put in the sort of thing. And this is just about making sure we've got all the information we need to make sure we can make the workshop as successful as possible. So it's some really simple things like the process title, right? What is it we're going to map? The scope of the process, where does it start and where does it finish? What's the purpose of the process? You also might want to think about what's the purpose of the workshop too. What does this process do? What's the purpose? What is the benefit the process gives us? But also, what are we trying to get out of the workshop? Who are the stakeholders that you need to have involved? Is there any existing documentation available that could help? What are the systems that might be involved that we need to think about as part of the process? And any known issues and risks. Of course, you build on these within the workshop. And as I said, there is a template, there is a process template, and it's on the community available. What I'll do is I'll drop a link in here to it actually, so it's easy to access. Now, the other thing that I think is really important that often gets forgotten about and then only discussed in the workshop and can often cause a bit of heartburn for some of those involved is be clear about whether you're looking to map the process as it is today or what you want it to be in the future. Essentially, the difference between just capturing process or doing process design is the way I think about it. So again, it's worth thinking about that beforehand and making sure you have an answer for it when that question comes up within the workshop. And now I went just going back a little bit to the idea of the purpose of the workshop. So again, this is something we've talked about in the community in the past, but is there one or two specific questions that you're trying to answer as part of this workshop? Now, it might be that you're just documenting the process because it needs to be documented, but you may have a specific question. It could be that you're looking for requirements or you're looking specifically for improvement opportunities. It's really worth calling that out quite clearly and then making that visible within the workshop because it helps keep people focused. There's always a danger whenever you're looking at processes that you find lots of cool stuff, like you find lots of cool improvements, but actually if your job is to identify the requirements, you've got to make sure you capture the requirements first and then also capture some of the improvement opportunities as well. You know, and again, thinking about how you manage time. Have we got time at the end? And then there's some really obvious stuff. So make sure you organise the meeting room and equipment. You invite your participants. But again, when you're looking at the equipment, just make sure that if you're using a projector or a TV screen, that it's working before you get started. Okay, that's just some tips on getting set up beforehand. Now, going actually into running the workshop. So again, here, a very simple process I've put together, and some of these boxes have notes on them. So actually, I think, again, thinking about this before the workshop and setting it up properly is having a really good introduction for people, especially those who have not been in a process workshop before, or especially one that's been used, that's been done with Skore. So make sure you're covering, you know, all of the stuff we talked about in the previous on the previous process, but why are we here? What's the purpose of the session? Also doing some introduction, so making sure you know who everyone is, what their role is, getting to know each other. Setting some ground rules I found is really important, and I have somewhere I have a PowerPoint slide with a set of standard ground rules, which I can use in workshops. Sometimes printing these out on a bit of paper and sticking them up on the wall or writing them on a flip chart or whiteboard is really useful as well. And it's just about making sure that everybody's on the same page. So going through those at the beginning of the workshop, and it's simple stuff like turn your phones off, make sure, agree that only one person at a time talks. What gets said in the room stays in the room. Do you want to give people the freedom to say whatever they need to say to really find out what's going on within a process? And also think about things like, how do I handle conversations that maybe run on or go down into a rabbit hole? So maybe having a parking lot or something like that, where you can capture unresolved issues after 5 minutes to pick up afterwards. Again, if people are new to this approach to process mapping, then doing some sort of introduction, pose the question that I just mentioned before, and being clear about whether it's as is or to be. The other thing, I put a big pink sticky note on there just to highlight is, so if it's a particularly long workshop, maybe you're doing a whole day or several days in a row, make sure you've got snacks and refreshments for everyone. But my pro tip is avoid the chocolate and sugar, because what will happen is people they'll buzz for half an hour, and then there'll be a bit of a crash and people will be kind of half falling asleep, especially when you really need them to be energetic and get involved. Fruit is the way to go, I've found, to keep people engaged throughout the session. So when you actually get then into mapping the process, again, I've got some notes on here, but you hopefully should all know, remember the 5-step approach to the perfect process. We've run drop-ins on this before, and we will do again. It's just going back to the basics, making sure the title and the scope of the process is visible on the page right at the beginning. And then you're going through a set of kind of activities. It's an iterative approach to mapping the process. So you start by talking about what are the main activities. Once you've got all the activities up on the screen, you then talk about the why, or the output for each of those activities. That gives you the chance then to make sure that the activities are in the right order. You can then link them up, and then talk about who the roles are. Now, I'm sure for some of you who've been doing this a while, you'll know, or you'll get used to the fact that actually you can sort of do it in different orders. But what's nice about this approach, as I said, is it's iterative. So you're getting everybody in the room to think, to essentially step through the process in their own mind more than once. So they do it first with the activity, then they do it again with the outputs, then they do it again with the roles. And actually, when you do it in that way, you'll find that people will often remember stuff that they didn't think the first pass or the second pass. So it's really useful for doing that. And then the step 5, I've called it what else here, but it's about the other information. What else are we looking to capture? So again, if you're trying to capture requirements, or you're capturing improvement opportunities or issues or risks or whatever it is, again, you go through another pass through the process to do that. Did we miss anything, for example? I've got a few notes here in terms of managing participants as well, because I think this is a really interesting thing within a workshop. This is very brief in this example, but you really got to think about this. You'll often have different types of people in the room. So you'll have somebody who thinks really high level, and when you ask them about the process, they'll tell you the process in 4 or 5 steps. The next person in the room actually might be very, very detailed focused, and they'll start telling you about the process by telling you about how they logged into their computer, then they opened an app, then they clicked on this screen, so that you have this kind of mismatch. And there's always a danger when you have that if you spend too much time talking about the detail, the person who thinks of 50,000 foot would just go, this isn't for me, I'm not interested. Likewise, if you focus too much on the high level and don't capture the detail person will go, well, they're not listening to me, so I'll just sit here and fold my arms. So again, you've got tools in the Skore toolbox to help with this. So you chuck your what boxes onto the screen to capture your main activities, and you'll soon quickly get a feel for whether they're really detailed stuff. Are we talking about task level steps, or are we talking about high levels? when that happens, it's a great opportunity to then start having that conversation about, okay, are these steps really just a subset of a bigger activity? And get the group to think about that and talk that through, and then use the detailed view functionality in Skore to basically select the details, copy them, create the detailed view, and then paste them into the drop down that you've created, or the drill down you've created. And that way you've captured both the high level and the low level. You've kept everybody happy to some extent, but you've got all of the information, and you can come back and sort of tidy it up later. The other two characters that I regularly see in workshops is the shy person who doesn't say very much, and then the chatterbox who just talks and talks and talks. So for some reason, it tends to be salespeople that often fit in that role, but there'll almost always be somebody like that. And so you'll ask them, okay, what's the first step? And they'll tell you the whole process without breathing in between. And so in those sorts of situations, again, you've got some great tools to use here. I mean, with the chatterbox, what I find is sometimes you just kind of have to let them run, say everything they need to say, and say, brilliant, okay, right, let's go back to the first box. So what is the first step? What's the second step? And so on. You can also start to use the why boxes, again, maybe bringing that in a bit earlier, just to slow them down a bit and say, okay, tell me about, so you described that piece, that step. Why do you do it? What's the reason? What's the value it brings? And again, just thinking about that person who's not saying much and giving them an opportunity every now and again to just say, okay, what do you think about this? Does this make sense? Try and bring them into that conversation. The other thing I've put in a kind of a bit of a pro tip there. This is one thing I'm not sure if you're all familiar with this, but when you're running a workshop with Skore, you're often using a TV screen or a projector, which maybe doesn't have the best resolution. So we actually have what we call a workshop mode in the tool, which allows you to make better use of the screen real estate when you're in that environment. And you access this, so if I open up the left panel, so click the little arrow at the bottom to slide the panel out, and you'll see at the bottom of it, there's these two options. So one of them is full screen. So if I click full screen, what that actually does is that takes the browser full screen. So you get rid of all the edges of your browser. So again, you've immediately got a benefit from doing that. And then the other one there is called workshop mode. And if I click on that, you'll see that what it does is it actually hides all of the interface from the Skore application. So you've then got the complete canvas and nothing else. And then of course, then if I go into edit mode, you don't then have the drawing tools. That's the downside. But what you do have is you can use all of the shortcuts on here. So you can easily throw your boxes up, and of course you can still connect them together and use spacebar and all of those sorts of things to draw your boxes. So all the attachments and the details views and everything works. You can use the keyboard shortcuts as well to zoom in and out, which I, off the top of my head, I think is this button, okay, which I can zoom in and zoom out. And so again, it just really helps you make better use of that real estate, because again, I've seen this a lot in the last few years where we tend to be using more TV screens, that sort of thing, to instead of projectors as we used to have. Okay, so I'm going to go back, just switch this back to the normal mode and back out of full screen. And then just really, once you've mapped that first go of the process, I found it really useful to do a walkthrough, so a verbal walkthrough of the process. So saying the process out loud, or in the sequence that it's captured, often throws up some really interesting things. Because when you say it out loud, some people go, "Cool, do you know when you say it like that, it doesn't sound right, or it sounds unusual? Is that really what happens?" So again, it's just a really useful check. Another thing I found really useful is, if you don't already have it, is make a note of who attended. So not who was invited, but who actually turned up, because you will often, the team will often agree things in the workshop. So having a note of who was actually there on the day is really useful in case anyone comes back later and go, why was that decision made? Why did we decide to do the process that way? I have seen some teams who actually put a sticky note on the diagram and list all the names in there. It's entirely up to you whether you want to do that or not. But again, just knowing who was there is really useful. And then, of course, like any meeting, it's about agreeing any next steps or actions. What's going to happen after this? Okay. I'm going to quickly go back up to the top, go back into the final one. And the follow-up one is really simple. So I'll go through this very quickly. So make sure you share links to the process to the people who came along. Have they got access to it? So a few things to think about. Add users to the system where they don't already have a user account. If you're using access rights in Skore, make sure that you have given the people you're inviting to the process the right rights to be able to see it. And then send the links out. And sending a link out, the easiest thing is just to copy it from the browser and email it out to them. Request any feedback, so people can use the commenting feature if you want to gather feedback that way on the process. And then really important is just to keep people up to date with the changes that and what's happening with the actions and so on in the workshop. And I realize I've gone a little bit over time, so I'm going to stop there. And any thoughts or questions?
Craig, I think I really like it, having the process documented out, because I think it's also a good way to communicate those that you're running the workshop with. It's something that you could potentially share with them beforehand to say, look, this is from my perspective, in my team, for example, with the stakeholders we deal with. And sometimes we can have too many cooks on projects, and roles sort of get a little bit merged to some degree. But it's a good way of showing that from a BA perspective in my team, this is how we're going to take a workshop. These are the key steps we're going to take through it. And it also gives them a bit of that knowledge up front if they've not been involved in our workshops. And I think especially from my perspective at the SRA, it's just continuing our journey on promoting Skore more. And as we get more people on board and as we roll out to other areas, it's just pushing our processes of we're not just mapping a process to cover what you do in your day-to-day job. We're showing you what we do as well. Yeah, so I really like it. The one thing I did like, actually, which I know we have done in the past, is actually making sure that we do capture who's actually attended the workshops, because often we can invite, say, 15, 20 people, and there'll be some key players that haven't turned up, but it's really worth capturing that. So I think that's a really good point to pull out.
Yeah, it's really useful. As I said, I found it particularly useful when somebody comes back, because you often find yourself as the sort of consultant or analyst being the one who presents the process back later on to other people, not necessarily the people whose process it is, which I sometimes find a bit bizarre. But because you're the one presenting it back, you then get all the questions like, well, why is it like that? And it's like, well, okay.
We've had that, absolutely. We've had it on one of our recent projects where, best endeavours, we've got all the key stakeholders there, then for various reasons, some haven't turned up, and then it's all the questions. It's like, hold on a minute, you weren't there. You need to revisit or look at, you need to be involved, sort of thing, or send somebody along in your place. But no, it's good.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea about you taking the process and sharing it with people beforehand. And I find the whatever you're doing, it's going to be part of some sort of wider program of work or initiative. So I think it's really important when you're introducing this, especially if it's new to the organization, is to do some communication efforts around, again, why we're doing it, but also the approach and how it works and how it helps. But it's still a good idea to often reiterate that at the beginning of the workshop as well, just to sort of remind people and refamiliarize them with it. Any other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, can I ask? It's a similar sort of thing, really, on the recording participants. Have people ever used the version notes to do that? Is that something that you would recommend, just to say this version was in this workshop with these people, or is that not a good use of version notes?
That sounds like a good idea. It's not something that I've thought of before, but okay. interestingly, I was helping somebody with some changes they were making to a process last week, and I said to them, so what would be really good is if you just capture in the version notes why you were making this change at this particular time, so that if anyone comes back and asks. But yes, you absolutely could. I think you would. You just need to think about whether you put it, because you can put notes against every single revision.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so you need to be careful, because you at the end of a workshop you may have created 30 or 40 revisions in that workshop. So you have to think about whether you put it against the last one that was created.
Yes.
Or
I would do that, I think.
Yeah, or if you published the process, then you could put it against that published version.
I think the last one would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Certainly, because that's the one that we would be wanting people to review and add their comments onto. So yeah, doing on that, I think that's a good way, capturing it in the version comments. Then we're not creating another log or another document to say who's attended, who's not. It's just capturing, this is the version that's gone out, these people were in the session, sort of thing. I like that idea.
So for anyone who's not familiar with what we're talking about here, I'll just quickly show it. So against the process, if I go up to the title of the process, click the drop down there, there's an option called history. If I click on this, it sometimes takes a few minutes to open up. Well, that was quite quick in this case. And you'll see what this is doing is this is showing us all of the revisions that it's captured in the database. So as you're working on the processes, it's periodically saving them to the database. So you can go back and say, what did this process look like? So you can see that I was working on this yesterday. And so it's got all those revisions. So I could go back and look at what that process looked like at that point in time. Every single one of these revisions that gets created has this option to add or edit notes. And so you can just put, it's just a free text field, and you can put notes, and then they'd be visible here under the comments section. So again, as you said, if you've at the end of a workshop, you could come in here and put that list of attendees in here. And so if anyone comes back at some point in the future and says, well, why did we do this at this point in time, you'll be able to see that information will be stored there.
The other thing I was going to ask, it's a couple of very practical points actually. You said when you're sharing the version, and it's my usual, if we copy and paste from the URL, will it still take us to the latest version if we change from that? So if I say I want to share with you, because I quite often say, for example, I'll set up a meeting, 2 weeks time, we'll come back and look at this process. I'll put the link in the invite so people have got it, but then in between that, I'll maybe work on the process. Will it still take them to the latest version? Yeah,
well, it'll depend on the link that you share with them. And let me just quickly show you. So you see you can see this part of my browser, can't you?
Yes.
The URL. So you'll actually see the URL is although this causes, I believe, quite a bit of pain for the software developers, we made a very conscious decision to have a human readable URL link, so it's easy to know. So you should be able to see the name of the workspace in there, the name of the process, and then you'll see a tag that in this case it says latest. Right, so whenever it's got that latest in there, when anyone clicks on that link, they will always go to whatever the latest version is. Now, if you've got a process that's been published and you want people to go to the latest published version, that will actually say published rather than latest. So if you in that scenario, if you were to share this link that said latest, they would actually be going to the latest edited version rather than the latest published version. So think about that. If you want people to see the latest published, it should say published in there. And if you want to see the latest edits, it would go to latest edits.
Oh, that's useful to know. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So even if we've published, if we then send it to the latest link, it won't take you back to the published. When you've got a link within your process, it always takes you to the published, doesn't it? Or when you open it, it always takes you to the published. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Now it should tell you up at the top of the process somewhere. I forget that it does say somewhere up there, but it is worth looking at that the URL to see what's in there. And then the other one that you might I don't know whether this will be of use or not, but if I just go back to the list of revisions, each revision actually has a unique ID. So you've got a revision number there. And if I was to open one of those, the URL would change again, and instead of latest, it would have the revision number in there.
Yeah.
So again, if you wanted to share a specific previous revision, you could do that too with somebody.
That's useful to know, thank you. And then my final comment was keyboard shortcuts. I need to go back and review those because that looked like magic to me. I haven't used those keyboard shortcuts really, so that's good.
Well, the keyboard shortcuts, when you're in edit mode, the keyboard shortcuts are actually shown. They're not all of them, but they're contextual, and they're shown across the bottom. So depending on what screen you're on, it will show you which ones, the most commonly used ones, are available. And also up in the help menu, there is a section there called all keyboard shortcuts, and it lists them all out for you. But to be honest, I mean, obviously is using this a lot. The ones I use the most are W and click to create a what box, Y and click to create a Y box, and then there's the alignment tools. So if I select a line of boxes and press T on the keyboard, it will line all the tops on them. That's probably my most used one.
Can I ask a question? It's slightly detailed. If you, like on your screen here, you've got other one, I can see the follow-up after workshop map. If you decided that activity, I'll call them 1, 2, and 3, should be before what is now activity 2, can you move it around easily?
Yeah, you would have to probably disconnect it, because obviously when you move the boxes around, all the lines will move around with it as well, but you'll need to.
That's the sort of thing that comes up where you map something out, and then somebody says, like you saying about when you talk it through, somebody says, oh no, you do that bit, that's before, sort of a previous activity.
So that's exactly why we, in our 5-step approach, right, we go through that thing of title and scope first, but then it's activities, then outputs, then roles, because what you essentially end up doing is you have a bunch of activities, you talk them through, you reorder them into the right order, and then then you do the outputs, and it's at that point when everyone's going, oh, actually, now we've got that output there, that one actually comes before this, so maybe this box goes over here and that one goes that way. So that's
just
kind of why
around on the screen.
But in this case, with these ones here, for example, if you're saying so this box 3 here actually goes between boxes 1 and 2, then you can't. I could just drag and drop it, but what I'd want to do, it will move all the lines as well, so I would just maybe drop the connecting lines there. And then it's just a case you just move them around like that. And you'll notice that again, it's designed that the Y box follows the what box as you drag it around. And then this is what I was just to mention before here. So if I do, so my keyboard here, if I hold Shift and select all of those boxes, to select them all at the same time, and then press T on the keyboard, it aligns the tops. If I press H, it horizontally aligns, it's horizontally spaces them. And if you go up to the arrange menu, then you'll see it shows you what the shortcuts are for all of them as well.
Okay, so yeah, that's good. Now, only I'm thinking that if you're the facilitator person of this, being able to manage that, manipulate that easily and quickly, smoothly, is helps a lot in terms of credibility whilst you're in front of all the people arguing about, well, no, it's a type B, no, that's a type C, or whatever the question might be.
So I have a specific approach in that when I'm facilitating a workshop, I don't do any of those. Like, I'll use shortcuts to chuck the what boxes and the Y boxes, but I'd very deliberately leave my processes so that they're kind of, they're all a bit like this. The lines are all a bit over the place. And in 99.999% of workshops, you'll have somebody sitting there and you can see them, their leg will be jiggling up and down, and eventually they'll go, could you just move that box so it's lined with the other one? and then go through it, because I find that there's a danger that if you're sitting there while that conversation's going on and you're sort of going, right, I'll just line these boxes up, that you'll have some people in the room who'll just be watching you do that and not engaging in the conversation.
Yeah.
So that's why I sort of tend to leave the process very messy on the screen and then just tidy it up at the end.
Okay. Yeah. Ah, that's very showman-like, isn't it? So the magic at the end. It's yeah. No, I like it. It's good. Yeah. Thank you.
Any other thoughts or questions? I'm gonna.
One sort of one of my top tips, especially if you're new to Skore, you're not as quick as we are because we've been using it for years. It kind of goes to your point there, James. Don't try and map the perfect process. You know, if it looks a bit messy, or if it's off the page, or if it doesn't loop down, or someone said, oh, there's an extra step between box 2 and 3, so you loop it up. As long as it depicts the process correctly, tidy it up afterwards. You know, so don't. You know, we're very naughty because we show you nice, pretty processes, and they're all perfectly lined up. Actually, the most important thing in the workshop is to get people to agree the common process.
Yeah.
Then you can type it all up and the like. So don't sort of try, because you can. I've seen people. I've probably been guilty. You get hooked in and just making it look pretty, and then someone says there's an extra step, and you sigh. You know, it's like, no,
yes.
it up, you know? But what happens as well is if people see that they can add steps or they can disconnect it, or you have some proficiency in the tool, even if it doesn't look perfect, they then open up a lot more.
Well, that's
not like you've got 50 post-it notes on a whiteboard and someone says, oh, but there's one back here. You're going to have to physically move. When they see how dynamic the tool is, they start to open up and really challenge and really think, which is huge.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's good.
The other one I was going to say is because you do sort of sometimes get that situation where you are a little bit, maybe there's a lot of conversations. When we talk about mapping at the speed of conversation, we're certainly not expecting that you capture everything that gets said in a conversation. What you're trying to do is structure the conversation using the what and the why boxes. And I find this is where sometimes the why box is really powerful, when there's lots of conversation going on and you just sort of drop it in and go, okay, so why do you do that activity? And you get this moment of silence where you go, right, I can breathe, quickly catch up, and then while they talk about it.
Yeah. No, it's obviously a dynamic arena, and a certain amount of proficiency will always help, as you were saying, Chris. You know, kind of adds to that credibility, doesn't it? But yeah, don't put yourself under pressure is I suppose something to bear in mind, isn't it?
Exactly. A lot of conversation will take place sometimes just so you've got 2 words in a box.
Yeah.
Right. So you're not capturing all the conversation. There's an element of judgment that needs to be made about, okay, what is an important thing that I need to capture or item. But again, just sort of the way I sort of do this and think about it is just capturing bits and pieces. So often, as people are talking, you quickly jump in here and add a text field and just start adding notes to that. And people can always come back and go, oh, that's not really relevant, or actually let's elaborate on that a little bit later on.
Yeah, it's very powerful, isn't it?
It's really, a fascinating exercise with these types of workshops, because one of the things that's I believe is quite different is that by giving people this framework with the what and why boxes, is that the group will start to self-facilitate. Yeah, so as you as a facilitator are actually kind of freed up a little bit to ask often more leading questions, and it helps the team develop a deeper understanding of their process from when you're just facilitating and drawing all the information out of them. It's a much more of a sort of collaborative, co-creative type experience that they get.
Thank you.
Brilliant.